On April 17th at precisely 9:42 a.m., Arthur Art Vance, 68 years old, retired Air Force logistician and grieving widower, received a formal violation notice for planting tomatoes on his own front lawn. The offense? Unapproved agricultural installation. The punishment? A $50 fine and a 30-day ultimatum to return his landscape to its original compliant state. For a man who once coordinated multi-million-dollar military supply chains with second-by-second precision, this felt less like neighborhood order and more like strategic absurdity. 30 years of military service hadn't prepared him for Brenda Foster and the Maple Creek Estates HOA. He didn't plant tomatoes to rebel. He did it because of Martha, his late wife, the only chaos he ever welcomed. Her old seed tin had whispered something he hadn't heard in years: purpose. But now, between the sunflowers and squash, there was a new threat in the soil: regulations. Art didn't pick this fight, but he was a man who knew how to hold a perimeter. And this front yard wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a line in the sod. If you've ever wondered what happens when military grit meets suburban bureaucracy, and whether it's ever too late to start something worth fighting for, read on. The next morning, Art was a man transformed. He bypassed the newspaper and went straight to the garage. He pulled out a spade, a tiller, and a wheelbarrow, the tools feeling like old friends. He marked out a 20 by 20 foot square in the center of his pristine front lawn, driving stakes into the ground with military precision. He spent the next week turning the soil, a process that felt like turning the pages of his own life back to a time of purpose. His back ached, his hands blistered, but the physical exertion was a balm. The sweat that ran down his temples washed away some of the stagnant grief. He was fighting something: the soil, the sod, the silence. And for the first time in 2 years, he felt like he was winning. He amended the soil with compost and peat moss, following the instructions on Martha's packets as if they were technical orders. He built raised beds from cedar planks, his measurements exact to the fraction of an inch. His neighbors watched, of course. Curtains twitched. A few people, walking their dogs, paused for a moment longer than usual. He could feel their curiosity, a mixture of amusement and quiet disapproval. Front yard vegetable gardens were simply not done in Maple Creek Estates. But Art didn't care. He was on a mission. He planted the Cherokee purple tomatoes, the monster zucchini, the crisp butter lettuce, and the sweet peas that Martha had loved to eat straight from the pod. He watered them, weeded them, and talked to them. "All right, troops," he'd mutter to a row of fledgling carrots. "Let's see some forward progress." And they obeyed. Green shoots pushed through the dark soil like tiny, triumphant flags. The garden became a living, breathing thing in the middle of the sterile neighborhood. It was messy. It was chaotic. It was beautiful. It was Martha. Art felt her presence there in the warmth of the sun and the earthy smell of the soil. He was no longer just tending a garden. He was tending her memory. The change in him was palpable. The stoop in his shoulders lessened. He started whistling old Glenn Miller tunes that he and Martha used to dance to in the kitchen. The garden was his new command post, his reason to get up at 600. The first sign of trouble arrived on a sun-drenched Monday in early June. It wasn't a loud declaration of war, but a silent, insidious infiltration. Tucked neatly into the handle of his front door was a beige envelope. It bore the official logo of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Art carried it inside, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He sat at the kitchen table, the vibrant green of the garden visible through the window, a stark contrast to the sterile beige of the envelope. His hands, stained with honest dirt, felt clumsy as he tore it open. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly damning. "Dear Mr. Vance," it began, "this letter serves as an official notice of a violation of the Maple Creek Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions. An inspection of your property on this date has found it to be non-compliant with Article 4, Section 2B, Landscaping Standards, which states that front yard landscaping shall be limited to grass, ornamental shrubbery, and flower beds." It went on to detail the unapproved agricultural installation and informed him that a fine of $50 had been levied against his account. Failure to remediate the violation by restoring the lawn to its original state within 30 days would result in further fines. The letter was signed in a sharp, aggressive script. Brenda Foster, President, Maple Creek HOA Art, read the letter twice. He looked from the cold, printed words to the living, breathing testament to his newfound purpose just outside his window. A flicker of his old military defiance sparked within him. He had faced down colonels more intimidating than a homeowners association. But that fire was quickly dampened by a wave of profound weariness. He had just started to build a fragile peace, and now a new battle was at his door. The silence he had fought so hard to fill rushed back into the room, colder and more menacing than before. The mission, it seemed, had just become a whole lot more complicated. For 2 days, the beige envelope sat on Art's kitchen counter, a silent, mocking testament to Brenda Foster's authority. Art's initial defiance had curdled into a sour stew of resentment and resignation. He'd stare out at his vibrant, thriving garden, the leaves of the zucchini plants fanning out like elephant ears, the tomato vines heavy with promising green orbs, and feel a weary ache. What was the point? He was one man against a system. He'd fought his battles. Maybe it was time to just comply. Surrender was a tidy, orderly process. He could have the whole patch tilled and seeded with grass by the weekend. He was actually pulling on his work gloves, his mind set on this grim task of dismantlement, when he saw her. Eleanor Vance, from 2 houses down, was making her slow, deliberate way back from the mailbox at the end of the block. At 82, every step for Eleanor was a negotiation between her will and her traitorous hip. She paused every few feet, leaning heavily on a cane, her breath coming in shallow puffs. In her free hand, she clutched a small handful of letters. Art watched her, and the anger he felt toward the HOA letter shifted. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something else, something protective. He looked at his wheelbarrow, piled high with the first real harvest of cherry tomatoes, cucumbers, and a few heads of crisp butter lettuce. He thought of Martha's handwriting on the seed packet. "Share with the neighbors." It wasn't just a suggestion, it was an order from his late, beloved commander. Without a second thought, he abandoned his plan of surrender. He quickly washed a selection of the best vegetables, arranged them in a small wicker basket he'd found in the garage, and walked out his front door. "Morning, Eleanor," he called out, his voice warmer than he'd heard it in months. She looked up, startled, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Oh, Arthur, good morning." "Looks like you've got your hands full," he said, approaching her gently. "Let me help you with those." He took the mail from her hand. "I seem to have a bit of a surplus problem," he said with a slight smile, holding out the basket. "My eyes were bigger than my stomach when I planted, I guess. I was hoping you might be able to help me with it." Eleanor stared at the basket. Her eyes, magnified by her thick glasses, widened. The tomatoes were jewels of ruby red. The lettuce was a vibrant, living green, and a small, perfect cucumber lay nestled beside them. She looked from the basket to Art's face, and a slow, genuine smile spread across her own. It was a smile that reached her eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that spoke of a lifetime of kindness. "Oh, Arthur," she said, her voice soft. "They're beautiful. They look just like the ones my husband used to grow." She reached out a trembling hand and gently touched a tomato, as if verifying it was real. "I'd be delighted to help with your surplus problem." From her window, Eleanor looked at the small basket on her kitchen table. It was more than just vegetables. It was a splash of color in her monochrome world. It was the taste of summer, the memory of her late George pottering in their own backyard garden years ago. Most of all, it was a connection. In a neighborhood where most interactions were a polite wave from a passing car, this felt like a genuine act of seeing. Someone had seen her, had thought of her, and for a lonely widow, that was a harvest all its own. That small act of giving lit a pilot light in Art's soul. This was logistics. This was distribution. This was a mission with a clear, tangible outcome. That evening, he sat not with the HOA letter, but with a notepad. He drew a map of the immediate neighborhood. Eleanor Vance was the first entry. Who else? The Millers in 136 with their 3 young kids. He'd heard Mrs. Miller complaining at the mailbox that her youngest wouldn't touch a vegetable. Mr. Henderson at the end of the cul-de-sac, recovering from knee surgery. The next day, Art began his delivery route. He'd load up his wheelbarrow, which he'd nicknamed the Green Hornet, and make his rounds. He didn't just drop the food and run. He'd stop and chat. He learned that the Miller boy, an avowed vegetable hater, would eat carrots if he could pull them from the ground himself. He learned that Mr. Henderson missed the taste of a real, garden-fresh tomato more than anything. Observing all of this from his home office window was David Chen, a 35-year-old lawyer who'd moved to Maple Creek for the quiet. David had initially seen Art's garden as a quirky, if ill-advised, project. He'd seen the HOA notice on Art's door and had shaken his head with a cynical sigh. Here we go. He'd dealt with enough petty HOA disputes in his career to know how they usually ended, with the stubborn homeowner eventually paying the fine and reseeding their lawn. But he kept watching. He saw the daily pilgrimage of the Green Hornet. He saw Art kneeling in the dirt, showing the Miller boy how to properly harvest a carrot. He saw Eleanor Vance now sitting on her front porch in the afternoons, often with a cup of tea for Art when he passed by. The garden wasn't just a code violation, it was becoming the neighborhood's heart. The invisible fences that had existed between these identical houses were starting to dissolve. People were talking, not about property values or crabgrass, but about recipes for zucchini bread. One afternoon, as Art was handing a bag of fresh green beans to a grateful young mother, she said, "You know, Art, seeing those little sprouts come up when you first planted, it gave me hope. Things have been tough lately. This is my little hope garden." The name stuck. It was whispered from one neighbor to the next, a secret password of goodwill. Art's project was no longer just Operation Green Thumb. It was the Hope Garden. He was no longer just a quiet widower. He was the keeper of the hope. And as the sun set each evening, casting long shadows across the neat, sterile lawns of Maple Creek Estates, one patch of land stood out, vibrant, a little messy, and pulsing with a quiet, defiant life. Art had found a new purpose, not in fighting, but in giving. The problem was, Brenda Foster only saw a fight she was determined to win. Brenda Foster believed in order. Order was a well-manicured lawn. Order was uniform mailboxes. Order was Article 4, Section 2B. Her life was a fortress built of rules, and she was its vigilant sentinel. To her, Art Vance's garden was not a charming anomaly. It was a breach in the perimeter wall. It was chaos, sprouting wantonly in the form of tomato vines and leafy greens. From her own immaculate living room window, which overlooked the street, she saw the comings and goings. She saw the wheelbarrow. She saw the neighbors congregating on the sidewalk, their laughter a discordant note in the neighborhood's carefully composed symphony of quietude. They didn't see what she saw. They saw fresh vegetables. She saw the first slip in a slide toward collapsing property values, toward neighbors thinking they could put an old couch on their porch or paint their front door a non-approved color. She had fought too hard for her own sense of stability after a messy divorce had shattered her world. Control over Maple Creek was the one part of her life that was not messy, that would not leave her. The petition was the last straw. Eleanor, bless her meddling heart, had told her all about it, thinking Brenda would see reason. It only hardened Brenda's resolve. This was no longer a simple violation. It was an insurrection. Art Vance wasn't just a gardener. He was a revolutionary, and she would not allow his populist uprising to succeed. Her next move was precise and official. A certified letter requiring a signature. Inside, the language was colder. The fine quadrupled to $200, and a new stark deadline was set. 14 days to fully eradicate the agricultural installation. She didn't stop there. She needed a public demonstration of authority. The next afternoon, she saw her chance. Art was on his knees, patiently staking a tomato plant that was leaning under its own prodigious weight. Brenda marched across her own perfect lawn and down the sidewalk, her sensible heels clicking with stern purpose. "Arthur," she said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the warm afternoon air. Art looked up, squinting. "Brenda?" He stayed on his knees, a deliberate, small act of passive resistance. "I trust you received the latest correspondence," she said, her arms crossed. "The one that cost me $8 in postage?" "Hard to miss," Art replied, his voice dangerously calm. "This has gone on long enough," she said, her voice rising slightly as a few neighbors, sensing the tension, slowed their stroll. "This thing is a flagrant violation. You are undermining the aesthetic integrity of this entire community. I think I'm just growing tomatoes, Brenda. You are encouraging disorder. What's next? Chickens? A goat? Her voice was verging on shrill. There are rules for a reason. They protect our investment. They protect us from chaos. Art slowly got to his feet, wiping the rich soil from his hands onto his jeans. He was taller than her, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of uncertainty. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't arguing. He was just looking at her with a kind of profound pity. "My wife Martha would have loved this chaos," he said softly. "She would have said it was the sound of people living. I'm sorry you can't hear it." He turned his back on her and went back to his tomato plant, leaving Brenda standing on the sidewalk, exposed and furious. The battle was no longer about the lawn. It was personal. That evening, a shaken Art called David Chen. "I think I need a lawyer," he said. David came over and, for the first time, stepped inside the Hope Garden. He listened intently as Art recounted the confrontation. David nodded, his legal mind clicking into gear. "She's overplaying her hand," he said. "Public confrontations, personal attacks. That's not a good look. But we can't fight this on emotion. We have to fight it on her turf, the bylaws." They sat at Art's kitchen table, the infamous beige covenant book between them. For 2 hours, they read through the dense, mind-numbing legalese. It was David who found it, buried deep in a subsection. "Here," he said, his finger tracing a line. "Article 4, Section 2B, the one she cited. It lists what's allowed: grass, ornamental shrubbery, and flower beds. But look at what it doesn't do. It doesn't define ornamental." Art looked at him, confused. "So?" A grin spread across David's face. "So, who's to say a tomato plant isn't ornamental? It has lovely yellow flowers. It produces beautiful, glossy, red and purple globes. A squash plant has huge, dramatic blossoms. Compared to a boring green boxwood, I'd say this garden is far more ornamental." It was a loophole, a small, beautiful, magnificent loophole. "It's an argument, at least," David continued, his excitement growing. "A foothold. We combine this legal ambiguity with the petition and the testimonials from the neighbors. We don't just say she's wrong. We show that the community believes the garden fulfills the spirit of the law, even if she disagrees with the letter." Art felt a surge of energy he hadn't felt since his days in the service, the thrill of finding a strategic advantage against a superior force. He looked at David, then out at his garden, now cloaked in the soft light of dusk. The lines had been drawn, but now he had a plan of attack. He wasn't just a gardener defending his patch of dirt. He was a veteran, armed with a lawyer, a loophole, and a growing army of neighbors who were tired of being told what to do. The discovery of the ornamental loophole changed the equation. It armed the burgeoning rebellion with a legitimate weapon. David Chen, energized by the challenge, transformed from a passive observer into a field marshal. His first move was to launch a private Facebook group, the Friends of the Hope Garden. He invited Art, Eleanor, and a few other neighbors he'd seen chatting by the garden. Within 48 hours, it had over 50 members. It became the neighborhood's digital town square. David started by posting a simple, clear explanation of the bylaw ambiguity. Then the stories began to pour in. The mother of the picky eater posted a photo of her 5-year-old son, his face beaming with pride, holding up a slightly crooked carrot he'd just pulled from the earth. The caption read, "He ate 3 of them, raw. Thank you, Art." Hope Garden. Mr. Henderson, the man recovering from knee surgery, wrote a long, heartfelt post about how Art's daily visits with fresh vegetables were better than any physical therapy, a reminder that he was still part of the world outside his own 4 walls. Eleanor, with help from her granddaughter, uploaded a picture of her beautiful tomato and cucumber salad, writing, "This tastes like sunshine and kindness. Some things are more valuable than uniform grass." The petition, which had been a simple clipboard affair, went digital. The support was overwhelming. People Art had only ever seen pulling into their garages were now his most vocal advocates. The Hope Garden became a symbol for everything the residents felt was missing from their managed community: spontaneity, generosity, and genuine connection. This groundswell of support was not lost on the other members of the HOA board. Frank Miller, a retired accountant who had served as treasurer for 5 years, was starting to get nervous. He had always supported Brenda. She was efficient, she was on top of things, and she kept the neighborhood looking sharp, which Frank believed was the HOA's sole purpose. But his email inbox was now flooded. His phone was ringing. People weren't angry, they were passionate. They spoke of Art's kindness, not his code violation. At the grocery store, 3 different people had stopped him to talk about the garden. Frank had always operated on balance sheets and bylaws. He was now facing a currency he couldn't quantify: goodwill. He looked at the Facebook group, scrolling through the photos and testimonials. He saw his neighbors, people he'd lived beside for a decade, connecting in a way he'd never witnessed. Brenda called him to strategize for the upcoming meeting, her voice tight with righteous indignation. "We have to hold the line, Frank," she'd said. "It's a matter of principle." But Frank was starting to wonder if they were standing on the wrong line. Brenda, for her part, saw the online activity not as a community coming together, but as a mob being incited. She felt betrayed. She was the one who spent thankless hours reviewing architectural requests and negotiating with the landscaping company. She was protecting their collective investment, and they were treating her like a villain. The opposition only solidified her conviction. She was no longer just enforcing a rule. She was saving the neighborhood from itself. She prepared for the quarterly HOA meeting with the meticulousness of a general preparing for a final stand. She created a PowerPoint presentation titled "Protecting Our Standards." It featured high-resolution, unflattering photos of the garden, a close-up of a wilting leaf, a shot of the unsightly wooden stakes, a picture of the wheelbarrow parked on the lawn. She printed out copies of the bylaw with Article 4, Section 2B highlighted in yellow. She was ready to fight for the soul of Maple Creek Estates. Meanwhile, in Art's quiet house, a different kind of war council was being held. Art, Eleanor, and David sat around the kitchen table. Art was nervous. He was a man of action, not of words. The thought of speaking in front of a crowd made his stomach churn. "I'm no good at this sort of thing," he admitted, looking at his dirt-caked fingernails. "You don't have to be," Eleanor said, patting his hand. Her touch was frail but firm. "Just tell them what you told me. Tell them about Martha. Tell them why you started." David nodded in agreement. "Eleanor is right. My job is to handle the legal argument, to present the petition and the evidence from the community. Your job is just to be you, Art. You're the heart of this. Brenda's case is all about cold, hard rules. Our case is about people. We just need to remind them of that. They decided on a strategy. David would speak first, laying out the legal challenge and the community support. Then, they hoped, others would feel empowered to share their own stories. Art would speak last, bringing it all home. He spent the next evening not in the garden, but at his desk, writing and rewriting a few simple words on a single index card. He wasn't preparing a speech to win a debate. He was preparing a final report on his mission, a mission that had become about so much more than just planting seeds. The community room at the Maple Creek Library was a sterile beige space, buzzing with an unfamiliar tension. The air, usually smelling of old paper and floor wax, was thick with anticipation. It was standing room only. Neighbors who usually only saw each other through windshields now sat shoulder to shoulder on folding chairs. Art sat in the front row between David and Eleanor, his hands clasped tightly, the single index card in his pocket feeling as heavy as a stone. Brenda Foster stood at the podium, cool and composed. The HOA board sat at a long table beside her, Frank Miller fidgeting with a pen, avoiding eye contact with the crowd. Brenda clicked to the first slide of her PowerPoint. It was a photo of Art's house with the garden circled in a stark red line. "Good evening," she began, her voice amplified slightly by the microphone. "The first item on our agenda is a serious and persistent violation at 142 Maple Drive. As you can see." For 10 minutes, she laid out her case. She spoke of covenants, of aesthetic harmony, of fiduciary duty to maintain property values. She showed her unflattering photos. She read Article 4, Section 2B aloud, her voice ringing with conviction. It was a well-argued, logical, and completely soulless presentation. When she finished, she looked out at the crowd, expecting quiet compliance. The board will now vote on a motion to impose the maximum fine and place a lien on the property until the violation is fully remediated. A tense silence fell over the room. The board members looked at each other uneasily. Before the chairman could call the vote, David Chen stood up. "Madam President, before you vote, I believe the community has a right to be heard on this matter." Brenda's lips thinned. "This is not a public forum, Mr. Chen. It is a board meeting." "With all due respect," David said, his voice calm but firm, "it's our community, and we have something to say." He walked to the podium, placing a thick, binder-clip stack of papers on it. "This is a petition signed by 63 households in Maple Creek, asking the board to recognize the overwhelming community value of what some of us call the Hope Garden." He then made his case, not with photos of wilting leaves, but with the law. He spoke of the ambiguity of the word ornamental. He argued that a garden that brought beauty, food, and joy to the neighborhood was the very definition of an ornamental asset. Then he paused. "But this isn't just about legal definitions." He turned a page. "This is about people." He began to read from the Facebook page. He read the post from the mother of the picky eater. He read the post from Mr. Henderson. He read a dozen more, his voice giving life to the words on the screen. When he finished, a new voice piped up from the audience. It was Eleanor. She stood slowly, leaning on her cane, but her voice was steady. My name is Eleanor Vance. I have lived in this neighborhood for 35 years. In the last 2 months, I have spoken to more of my neighbors than I had in the previous 10 years. That is because of Arthur and his garden. That garden isn't just growing vegetables, it's growing a community. To destroy it would be to violate something far more important than your rule book. A smattering of applause broke out. Then another neighbor stood up, and another. A young father talked about how it taught his kids where food comes from. A woman spoke of how the shared recipes made her feel less isolated. It was a floodgate of personal stories, washing away Brenda's cold, hard logic. Finally, Art made his way to the podium. He placed his calloused hands on the side and took a deep breath. He looked not at the board, but at the faces of his neighbors. "I'm not much of a talker," he started, his voice quiet but clear. He didn't look at his note card. "I started this garden because I was lonely. My wife, Martha, she was the gardener. I was just trying to feel close to her again. I was just trying to complete one last mission for her." He paused, his eyes finding Eleanor's in the crowd. "But it became something else. You all made it something else. You taught me that the best systems aren't about perfect order. They're about people. You taught me that a neighborhood is more than just houses. It's the connections between them." He looked at the board, his gaze finally resting on Brenda. "This garden is the most valuable thing I have, not because of what it grows from the ground, but because of what it has grown between all of us. You can take it away, but I don't think you can take away what we've built." He walked back to his seat. The room was utterly silent for a moment, and then it erupted in a wave of sustained, heartfelt applause. The board chairman cleared his throat. Frank Miller leaned over and whispered something to him. The chairman nodded. The vote wasn't just a victory, it was a rout. 4 hands against, none in favor. Brenda Foster sat motionless, her lips a thin line of disbelief. Her gavel never touched the table again. Within the week, she submitted her resignation from the HOA board, citing personal differences in vision. But behind closed doors, the truth was clear. She had lost control, and with it, her grip on the neighborhood. A quiet audit initiated by another board member uncovered a string of procedural oversteps, selective enforcement of rules, backdated warnings, and one especially damning email. He thinks he's special just because he wore a uniform. The board voted unanimously to bar her from holding future HOA leadership roles. Meanwhile, the Hope Garden was officially designated a community enrichment zone. Art received a framed certificate from the board, a printed gesture perhaps, but what mattered more were the smiles, the laughter, and the smell of fresh zucchini bread wafting down Maple Drive. 1 month later, on a golden Saturday morning, Art stood in the center of the expanded community garden, now teeming with neighbors. Raised beds stretched across the once-forgotten commons, each tended by a different household. Children pulled carrots. Veterans swapped planting tips. Eleanor sat under a wide-brimmed hat beside a new bench engraved with the words, "In memory of Martha, may we all grow something that lasts." David Chen nudged Art gently. "Well, Commander, mission accomplished." Art looked out over the garden, eyes catching the sunlit glint of ripe tomatoes and smiling faces. "Not quite," he said, kneeling to help a boy plant his first seed. mission ongoing,